everyone, and welcome to Rosen Sports Sunday, again live from our Channel 4 studios. Well, the NFL Draft has turned into a prime-time event. It's next Thursday night, and by the time the night ends, we'll hear more than any of us could care to imagine from the likes of Mel Kiper Jr. on Player X's measurables and upsides. This year's draft pales by comparison to the glamorous one of a year ago. No question about that. The Vikings had the 4th overall pick, and to no one's surprise, they quickly grabbed offensive tackle Matt Khalil out of USC, and really not only became an immediate starter, but also ended up on the all-rookie team, got a trip to the Pro Bowl. The first 2 picks were the most dynamic quarterbacks we've had coming out in a long time in the same draft. The Indianapolis Colts got their man to replace Peyton Manning and Andrew Luck, and Washington followed up with the electric RG3, who's now recovering from ACL surgery after leading Washington to the playoffs this past year. But not the same, of course, this year in the draft. Joining me on the couch, the radio voice of the Minnesota Vikings, the host, of course, of his own show each weekday from 9 to noon on KFAN, the one and only Paul Allen. PA, thanks so much for
Rosie.
Yeah, good to see you.
What's going on, buddy?
Well, last year I just mentioned we had Luck, RG3, Trent Richardson, Matt Khalil. You can't compare with the marquee names this time around, but if you're Jacksonville or Kansas City, are you just as excited about the so-called no names at the top of the list as we were a year ago?
I think you should be, because I think there's the foundation for a lot of building things for years to come for a lot of teams in this draft. It may be more blue-collar like, Rosie. It may be more meat and potatoes like, but from an offensive line standpoint, defensive tackle, the interior that kind of starts everything, it's very deep this year. So teams can get better, but it's just not as splashy as last year.
The gamesmanship that goes on leading up to the draft is the Vikings with the 23rd and 25th overall picks. What's your gut instinct? To keep both of them or try to perhaps move up if there's a player they really covet?
I think it's impossible to answer right now. And you know what? We're doing, the fans doing a big draft show beginning at 6:30 from All of America Field, and I hope to have more of a feel on what they're going to do at that time. I don't believe they'll trade up. I don't see the general manager, Rick Spielman, after the Percy Harvin trade, amassing as many picks as he has, 6 through the first 4 rounds, and giving them up in the first round to go up for one guy. But that doesn't mean in the second round he couldn't go up to earlier in the second round. So it could be linebacker, cornerback, wide receiver, defensive tackle. It's wide open.
Well, let's start with the wide receiver position, one which has had considerable depth to it and still a position of need, despite the fact of the acquisition of Greg Jennings. We'll get into that in a minute. What's your best wish list? Let's go over the top wideouts in the draft, at least according to you. Tavon Austin of West Virginia. Let's talk about this young man.
I like him. I don't want to call him a poor man's Percy Harvin simply because he runs the ball and catches short stuff. There you see him running the ball. He also catches the short stuff and turns it into big gains. But he does play like Percy Harvin. He makes the first guy miss. He's very fast. He's a good returner. He's very dynamic. It was interesting that there's another guy on their team named Stedman Bailey who had like 23 touchdowns. So Tavon Austin would get him close, and the Bailey guy would close on it. Tavon Austin is dynamic.
How about Cordell Patterson from Tennessee, 6'1", also going to be used on returns. Yeah,
I like him. His return skills are a big separator for him. You know, there are some knocks on him about route running and stuff like that when they get really hypercritical about where he should go, but he's exactly the kind of guy the Vikings need. He's a big guy who can play outside the numbers. He can return it. He's extremely fast. Would not be surprised if they took him.
Based on some other mock drafts that I've seen, I was a little surprised you have him number 3 on your list. I'm talking about Robert Woods of USC. The Gopher fans saw this young man. Pass-happy team with Matt Barkley. What do you like about him?
Well, from a value standpoint, where you can get him early to middle of the second round, why I like him is that he reminds me of Colts receiver Reggie Wayne. He's not the fastest guy in the world. He catches everything thrown to him. Very smart, very good route runner, knows how to score touchdowns, but you would be able to utilize 23 and 25, and then maybe with 52, your second-round pick, trade up by giving up like a fourth-round pick.
Second-round pick.
More of a second-round guy, but I think he'd fit here perfectly. I love him.
What about DeAndre Hopkins from Clemson? He's got big-time skills as well. This is pretty deep wide receiving draft.
Rosie, it's fantastic. I mean, DeAndre Hopkins, there'd be nothing wrong with him. Justin Hunter, there are some sneaky ones like Quentin Patton, Terrence Williams from Baylor. Hopkins is also a big, physical, imposing presence. You put him with Jennings, Jerome Simpson, Jarius Wright, Kyle Rudolph, and the MVP in the backfield, and we get better.
Well, let's talk about that. Let's circle back. After Harvin was traded for that other first-round pick, shortly thereafter, as we know, the Vikings went back to Packerland and grabbed another player, Greg Jennings. How much of an an impact will he have or need to have on Christian Ponder's progress? In other words, he now has his most reliable receiver he's had since signing on with the Minnesota Vikings.
It's an excellent question because really, you know, and I'm a big fan of Christian's on and off the field, but his last year was an incomplete. Started really well, fell apart in the middle, but everybody was on Christian after that game at Lambeau Field early December. I mean, teammates, everybody was on him, and he responded and bounced back and helped lead the team to the playoffs. Now he has Greg Jennings. Now Greg had Aaron Rodgers. Yeah. So this is going to be interesting to see how much Greg can help Christian's game improve his second full year as a starter. And in talking recently with Packers tight end Jermichael Finley, who I've gotten to know pretty well, Jermichael says Greg will be on Christian in a good, loving way from day one, and that Christian will have some growing pains still, but Greg will be able to help him through those, and I think he's going to be fantastic.
He's a good guy to have in that locker room too, which they need. I mean, they absolutely have to have one of those guys, especially with Antoine Winfield gone.
Greg's a very well-respected guy. Now, the wild card here for me, because Kyle Rudolph's upper echelon tight end, you got the second-year guy in Jarius Wright, who came on okay at the end of the year. The wild card for me is Jerome Simpson, because even though he had a bad year last year with a bad foot, Jerome had some good moments at Cincinnati, and I think Jerome's going to bounce back next year and have a requisite season.
He was hurt last year.
He was hurt the majority of the season, into the Tennessee game early, and I think he's going to be good. I think our receivers are going to be okay.
Let's switch to the other side of the football. Let's not forget about the Viking defense. Defensive tackle Kevin Williams, likely as last year, redid his contract. He got a guy like Sylvester Williams in North Carolina who could be available, 23 or 25. They don't have a starting middle linebacker right now as we sit here tonight looking at their depth chart. It's such a critical position, a tough one for any rookie to play, no matter who it is. Let's talk about the possibilities. Alec Ogletree of Georgia. Some say might be undersized, might be better suited to a 3-4 rather than a 4-3 defense.
Right.
Could even be available. Is he going to go higher than the 23?
Alec Ogletree is a converted safety. So when you look at all of the linebackers the Vikings could take at 23 or 25, he's the one who will cover the pass best of everybody. You see him there in the circle. He comes in quickly, and he didn't bite for that fake right there. He's very fast. In my opinion, of the four the Vikings could take, Brown, Teo, Minter from LSU, or him, he's the most athletically gifted. You can play him in the middle or you can play him outside, so that position flexibility is going to help him a lot. However, I think the Chicago Bears are going to take him at 20.
Okay, so that brings us to our next question. The Vikings have invited the media circus to town for decades. They will again if they draft Notre Dame linebacker Manti Teo. Forget his, for a minute, at least his fantasy girlfriend, which we all know played out in that hoax. How good of a football player do you think the Vikings think he is, and can he play that middle position?
I'm not a big college football guy, so therefore I watched the BCS title game, and I watched him like everybody else. He got killed, but so did everybody else on that defense. Now, if you talk to those who watched all of his games, they will say that he did so many good things during the body of his career that his quick twitch instincts are as good as anybody in the draft. He sees it, he diagnoses it, and he goes after it. Now, I think that there's some liability to him in pass coverage. I know he had 7 interceptions last year, but a lot of them were off tips. I think he is naturally a very crafty guy, but he's a true middle linebacker. And the Vikings might use Aaron Henderson at middle linebacker.
That's a possibility.
It's a possibility.
I mean, that's the only option they have right now, if you look at it. I mean, they don't have anyone on, unless they go out. I mean, Urlacher's not coming here.
No, I don't think so. I mean, obviously they can draft one, and the guy they draft's going to have to start day one.
Last year's draft, and the Vikings would love the Notre Dame players. Very productive draft. Look at Khalil, Harrison Smith, Josh Robinson, Jarius Wright, Rhett Ellison, Blair Walsh had such a sensational year. Which one needs to take the next kind of leap if you want to look at those guys? And there are some very good players there to have that kind of an impact in his second year with the Vikings.
Interesting question, because Khalil's a perennial Pro Bowler. I think Harrison Smith's going to be a Pro Bowler. Blair Walsh already got there. Rhett Ellison is extremely good at what they ask him to do. So it has to be Jarius Wright, because when Percy went down, Jarius jumped in the Lions game, and his first reception was huge. You know, they started running the Percy plays with Jarius Wright towards the end of the year, but Jarius is a slot receiver where Jennings can play in the slot, but he's good outside. Simpson's an outside guy, and I think they're going to draft an outside guy. So for the team to take 10 wins to 11 or 12, and for these guys to complement Ponder better, I think Jarius Wright's the answer.
We're going to take a break right now. We're going to talk some hockey. I'm going to get you back a little later to answer some Twitter questions, and I also want to talk about Antoine Winfield, because what happened with the Vikings in Seattle that led him to go to the Seahawks.
Sure.
Don't go away. But first, we're going to discuss the Wild with FSN's Kevin Gorg. Yeah, stay with us. What happened out there tonight? back to Rosen Sports Sunday, and fresh from his studio hosting at FSN of the Wild game with Calgary at the X tonight, Kevin Gorg, and a not-so-funny thing happened on the way to announcing playoff tickets going on sale tomorrow morning. The Wild, Kevin, drop, as you know, a very key home game to a team going nowhere. A team they beat on the road last week. Calgary wins at 4-1. They haven't won a home game in April. They're 0-6 against teams ahead of them in the West. Not exactly, as we heard from Zach Parise, not exactly playing and sounding like a team with a lot of confidence right now. No,
they're frustrated right now. There's no getting around that. And I think that the fans right now are a little bit tense. I think that if you take a look at the way this thing has played out, it looked like a foregone conclusion a couple weeks ago. They're going to have to earn their way in. The good thing is for the Minnesota Wild, as bad as they, it turned out tonight, they still have a really good opportunity in front of them where they can win 2 out of 3 here this week, punch their ticket, and then hopefully rely on some of those key guys to upset a team like Anaheim in the first round. You mentioned the fan situation. I was only watching on television. You were there. They were down only 2-1 in the third period. It just sounded awfully quiet at the X. Like the fans had a premonition of what was to come. I mean, it wasn't like this, hey, a big rally cry. They were sitting on their hands, and the Wild really didn't give them any reason to cheer. Yeah, they, like the team, they came out full of fire. The crowds have been great all season long. They're energetic, but I think the Minnesota sports fan in general right now is always waiting for the other shoe to drop. Well, and I think it's unfortunate, and I think the team feeds off that, because you're right, in the third period, the fans were nervous and the team played nervous, and you kind of felt like if Calgary got the next goal to go up 3-1, it was lights out, and that's how it turned out. Reminding the Gophers against Yale. The Gophers had all those shots on goal, but it didn't matter. Yale would come down, boom, they get a shot, and that's what happened. Having an advantage on shots on goal matters not if they're not followed up with a rebound or creating chaos in front of the net, and we saw that time and time again tonight. Calgary's first goal, Mark Kundry, is that his first NHL game? Wow. Yeah, and that's the thing. Wes Walls talked about that in our pregame show. You got a bunch of kids out here that are trying to make a name for themselves. We all know about Ben Hanowski, the St. Cloud State kid. You got 8 other guys out there that are trying to earn a roster spot for next year, including their goaltender, and they've got nothing to lose. And the Wild, again, it's the same guys night in, night out. The one thing you have to be proud of is the Mikko Koivus, the Zach Parises, the Ryan Suiters. They are answering the bell every single night. I think you sensed that when you heard Zach Parise in the postgame show. This guy is laying his heart and soul out there every single night, and he wants to get in the playoffs, and I think he's frustrated because they haven't punched their ticket yet. Well, he needs a lot of help from the other lines, no question about that. In the second period, Backlund beat Backstrom on a play that looked like it should have been knocked away from the goalie here. Yeah, a couple of key breakdowns. This is one of them. When you allow teams to get those second and third looks, something the Wild didn't do in the third period, bad things happen. And I think you hit the nail on the head, Rosie. Secondary scoring has to carry the hockey team. Here it is. I mean, Joey McDonald had 34 saves, but the Wild just can't force any big rebound chances here. No, and when they run into tough spots like they did tonight, like they did last weekend against Columbus, you're not seeing that second and third line contribute goals. Your fourth line is always going to be your grinding line, but you need Devin Setaguchi, you need Matt Cullen, you need Jason Zucker, you need Brodziak, you need Clutterbuck, you need some of these guys to step up, because teams know right now if you shut down Mikko Koivu, if you shut down Zach Parise, it's going to be hard for this team to win. Well, after the disappointing losses, Calgary scores here late to take a 3-1 lead. Kyle Brodziak said they know they have to get the job done by themselves.
We put ourselves in a tough spot, but we're still in driver's seat. I mean, yeah, it makes it more difficult now, but we just got to dig deeper. Like I said, we're still in the driver's seat. It's still ours right now, and we got to keep it. We got to keep it. We got to make sure that we come tomorrow. Tomorrow's a new day. We got to figure out what we need to do to get better, and make sure we come with a real strong effort against LA on Tuesday.
Yeah, the term scoreboard watching will take on a whole new meaning this last week. We knew when the lockout shortened season was announced, Kevin, it would likely go down the wire. Now the Wild have really made it tougher on themselves. It's 4 spots in the West already clinched: Chicago, Anaheim, Vancouver, and LA. Here's what's the race is really happening right now. Minnesota and Columbus now both with 51 points. The Wild hold the tiebreaker there. But right now, you got other teams playing. I mean, you got Dallas, which is still knocking on the door. They're going to probably gain a point. They're tied with LA right now, 3-all. So they're getting close as well. So Kings just won in overtime, so that helps a little bit. Takes a little of the pain away, but you saw Columbus and the Wild tied right there. Columbus is on an unbelievable run right now. Huge win tonight for Todd Richards and that hockey team at San Jose, but they only have 2 games left, and one of those games is against Dallas on the road. So one of those teams is going to lose on Thursday, and whoever loses that game Thursday probably out. Detroit plays at home against Phoenix tomorrow night, and it gets back to what Kyle Brodziak said. I would still prefer to be in the top 8, in control of my destiny, than in that 8, 9, or 10 spot looking for help
help along the way. They have earned that by how well they've played this season. Right now, people, I think, are all kind of in the meat grinder because they're not playing the way they were a month ago, but they can still straighten this thing out and get in there.
Especially offensively, but as we talk about the goalkeeping and Nicholas Backstrom, it's all on his shoulders. How would you analyze his play right now? And you know, again, he can't do it all, but is he the kind of guy that they need to really stand on his head here this last week?
He is the guy. I mean, Rosie, there's no getting around that. Nicholas Backstrom's been a rock for this team all season long. Without his play, they never get into the top 8. And I think, you know, people like to criticize Nicholas Backstrom because he is the goaltender. The goaltender always gets too much blame when things don't go well, always gets probably a little too much credit when things are going well. But I'll tell you this, they're not getting in and they're not winning any playoff series with the guy. They're going to sink or swim with Nicholas Backstrom. And this is a guy that wants to play every single night. And I think if you look at the body of work this year, he has given his team a chance to win, and that's all you can ask.
Well, owner Craig Leopold might be chewing on glass if his team doesn't make the playoffs, considering the investment he made in Parisi and Suter. Granted, it was for the long haul. Expectations had to be realistic. You got to make the playoffs. They're selling playoff tickets tomorrow. They've been advertising it.
No doubt about it, and I think that's the one difference between this Wild team, the team that made the playoffs in 08, the team that went on the run in 03. For so many years, there's been no expectations. They've been the little engine that could. This year, it's a little bit different, and you're seeing a team right now that's having to face that pressure when things don't go on the power play. You're hearing the crowd. You heard the crowd tonight in the third period. Some booze trickling in. There's more pressure. There's more chips on the table. When you bring in guys like Suter and Parisi, make a move at the trade deadline with Pominville. Craig Leopold has sent that message. You love an owner that's doing that, but right now these players are having to deal with that pressure, and tonight they didn't deal with it very well.
So they get paid for it. We're going to take a timeout here. When we return, PA rejoins us to take your Twitter questions. We'll be right back. Stay with us. And welcome back to this Fast Break Show with Paul Allen and Kevin Gorg. And gentlemen, I know you guys have worked together for many years in Canterbury. We're going to answer some questions on Twitter. Since you just got on Twitter, Mr. I don't want to do social networking. I love it. No, you just can't get off the thing.
I gave in. I'm obsessed with it. I like it.
We get 1,000 tweets after never, ever being on Twitter.
All right, well, listen, Jason Hawk wants to know, what is a more pressing Vikings draft need? Middle linebacker or defensive back? Antoine Winfield, gone. Not that he was going to start, but big loss.
It's I don't want to say it's 50-50, but we have in Chris Cook and Josh Robinson two guys who I think can play right now. And Chris Cook is coming up at the end of his contract, and he's having a decent career on the field despite no interceptions. So I'm going to say linebacker.
All right.
I would agree. Show me an NFL team that's going to be a postseason factor that doesn't have a go-to guy that can play middle linebacker, make big plays. I'm with you. You got to go linebacker.
I can't wait to get your opinion on this one. Travis Holm wants to know, thoughts on drafting the Honey Badger within the Vikings organization, Tyrann Mathieu?
Yeah, I like the Honey Badger. He's a third-round guy. He's an inside corner guy to replace Winfield, a very willing tackler, blitzes well from the edge. And he's had some significant off-the-field problems. But in the Vikings, they have a very good personnel. They have a very good player development program led by a guy named Les Pico, who's done a lot of work with a lot of people.
Are teams even scared off by at least failed drug tests anymore? The numbers, the sheer numbers of them.
The NFL take on this is if you don't like him, you say, let somebody else be the hero. If you do like him, you rely on your player development department to keep him squared away.
Listen, before we go to the next question, what happened with Antoine Winfield? Did the Vikings drop the ball on him the way they handled it, or was it just, did you talk to him since then?
Yeah, he and I have texted, but you know, I think the Vikings had a certain number they wanted to bring him back at, and they gave it to Antoine, and Antoine waited, and I think Antoine called their bluff, and Antoine opted to leave after that. I think the general manager and Rick Spielman, certainly not speaking for him, that granted he wanted Antoine back and teammates and the coaching staff wanted him back, but Rick has a plan not only for now but for down the road to fortify the spot for years.
Well, interesting. And you know, let's get to the next question here. Patrick Sullivan wants to know, any chance of moving up? We talk about moving up, which is you feel he probably won't do, but we'll see. Defensive tackle Sheldon Richardson is pretty high in the board.
No, I'm not a fan of that. I am not a fan of the Vikings moving up in the first round of this draft. Now, when it comes to moving up in the second round, take somebody at 23, take somebody at 25, and then package something with 52 to move up higher in the second round. I am a fan of that.
We have less than a minute to go. Horse racing is coming up. We have something called the Kentucky Derby.
Yeah. It's hard to believe it's 12 days away with this weather, right?
I know. I want the picks right now, Kevin Gorg.
That's all I am.
Let's go. Come on.
Of the long shots, I'm sticking with Oxbow. Gary Stevens for D. Wayne Lucas. Think Thunder Gulch. Think Winning Colors. And then if you like one of the favorites, Orb to me. Shug McGahee is a trainer that deserves a Kentucky Derby. He has yet to win one. Orb is a big closer in a speed-filled track. I'm going to box up the two big O's, Oxbow and Orb.
What about Rick Pitino? He can't lose right now, right? He's got a
Golden
horse,
Sense, right?
Yeah, the Santa Anita Derby winner. I like a horse named Normandy Invasion, so I'm going to take my horse with the 2 or 3 he mentioned, box them together, and then we're going to try to find financial freedom. That's what we do every year.
Make money for you out there. Listen to these two guys.
There it is.
Guys,
I'm sure the Vikings are real happy to see me on TV touting bets. I'm sorry.
That's the way it works. They print them in the paper every day. We'll be back to wrap it up right after this. Stay with us. We're not giving the odds of the Vikings next.